I'm going to keep my remarks confined to the topic at hand, which is the whole immigration mess, because this is a huge topic. In my committee, we've probably held about 40 hearings on this. As a manufacturer, as a business guy, I've solved a lot of problems. You go through a problem-solving process, right? Gather information, try and define the problem properly, do root cause analysis, then try and establish some achievable goals. Then start designing solutions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a very shortened version of this problem-solving process we've been going through in my committee. And it really starts with the history of illegal immigration, basically represented by apprehensions at the border. So nobody knows how many people in this country, undocumented, living in the shadows illegally. That's really not good for our country. It's a very bad situation. But the only way we can come to some level of measurement of the extent of the problem is through how many people we apprehend that are illegally crossing. So this chart goes all the way back to 1925. And you can see the ebbs and flows. But primarily it's been a flow since we ended the Bracero program. But I want to spend a little bit of time on the Bracero program. That was a program started really in reaction to World War II. It ran from about 1942 through 1964. When all of our young men went over to World War II, we needed people to pick vegetables and work in America. So we started a formal process of allowing Mexicans to come in, work for a few months, or sometimes back then probably longer term. But they generally were in agriculture in California. And you can see that there was a problem, because once we brought the flow in, a lot of people also took advantage of the situation. So there's a pretty large flow that really peaked in 1954. At which time they did set up a process of apprehension and expedited removal, kind of solve that problem. So we've seen what we need to do. There has to be a consequence for people coming in this country illegally. It's called expedited removal. If you don't have a valid claim, we have to remove them. And that sends a pretty powerful signal. So the Bracero program lasted until about 1964. It came under attack by labor unions, the ACLU, those types of groups. By the way, there were definitely abuses in the Bracero program. It was far from perfect. But what it represented is when you made things a legal process, when, particularly for California agriculture, which is very seasonal, where a Mexican could come in from, work for 2 or 3 months, work their tails off, by the way, and we have to, let me set that aside real quick. We have to first acknowledge we are a nation of immigrants. Every wave of immigrant, I don't care what culture, what nationality, came to America for the idea and promise of America. They came here to better their lives. They came here and they generally worked the jobs at the lowest end of the economic spectrum. They've worked their tails off. And because of this marvel we call America, within a generation or two, their sons and daughters were not only getting educated, they were starting and innovating and creating and building businesses. Right now, it's amazing. I don't have the stat right off the top of my head, but the number of CEOs of major 500 companies that are first and second generation immigrants is incredibly high. So again, we are a nation of immigrants. It is what has made this nation great. There's a great book written by Arthur Brooks. He made the point that one of the reasons America is such a risk-taking entrepreneurial type of society is because we're a nation of immigrants. It takes a fair amount of guts to hop in a little wooden boat, or even today leave, maybe war-torn, maybe less than ideal economic circumstances, but still leave your culture and your nation behind and come to America seeking opportunity. That is a definition of a risk taker. So we need to acknowledge that, we need to embrace that, but we need to make it legal. And when it is legal, the process works. So again, getting back to the Bracero program, you had circularity of immigration. People could come to this country, work their tails off for 2 to 3 months, earn a year's worth of salary, and go home. That benefited America. It quite honestly benefited those communities in Mexico. But then we ended that for a host of reasons, some legitimate, some not so legitimate. The result was just a steady increase then over the years of people coming in, seeking that opportunity, and doing it illegally. But because we didn't have a legal process for them to come and go, they stayed. And the legal population continued to grow till it really peaked in 1986, partly because there was a lot of talk about doing an amnesty program. And again, I don't fault Ronald Reagan. I thought this actually made a lot of sense The problem is in granting the amnesty to recognize the fact it's not good for people in this country permanently living in the shadows. But what didn't happen is the other half of that immigration bill, which was actually fixing the problem, stopping the illegal flow. So at the time, we estimated it's going to be somewhere about 1.5 million, I think, that were going to take advantage of Reagan's amnesty. I think more than 3 million people ended up. Again, just recognize the fact that we don't know how many people in this country. Right now, the current estimates are somewhere between 11 and 12 million people. It's way high. So Yale researchers took a look at that, used different statistical sampling. They figured somewhere between 16 and 30. And so they've chosen the midpoint at 22. We don't know. Okay? So anyway, so Reagan's amnesty tailed off a little bit, but then because of the strong booming economy in the 90s, it once again peaked in 2000 to over 1.6 million people. Now, and I would, by the way, credit NAFTA. I know sometimes that's not, but I think NAFTA's been a win-win-win situation. One of the reasons that the illegal immigration came down is because NAFTA was successful. And it helped the Mexican economy grow, provide good work for Mexicans in Mexico, and so there's less pressure. And by the way, we started having some hard times after 9/11, and our economy was not as strong as it should be. So anyway, that's been kind of the history. Now, you see all that blue in there versus the red. Blue basically represents single adult males, or just single adults. What has happened starting in, I'll go to the next slide here. This shows the red is unaccompanied children, blue are family units. This is today's problem. These are not single adults. And what you see, and we've included everybody, all borders, but it's primarily the southwest border. But you can see in 2009, 10, 11, if you only count Central American kids, you're probably talking 3,000 to 4,000 unaccompanied children per year coming in. If you count everybody, it's about 20,000, 19,000, 16,000. Okay? So it wasn't much of a problem. We weren't even keeping track of people coming in exploiting the situation under families, which I'll explain a little bit later. So we didn't have a problem. And then we did have a problem of people over the decades coming in, bringing their little 2-year-olds. Now these 2-year-olds are adults. They believe they're U.S. citizens. Okay, they had every right to believe they're U.S. citizens. This is where they grew up. This is where they were born. They grew up, or they were brought over here. And, well, if they were born, they were U.S. citizens, but they were brought here as youngsters, and they were totally integrated in our society. So we have a huge problem. It's definitely more than 700,000 people that signed up for DACA. It's probably double, maybe even triple that amount. But anyway, it was a problem. But rather than go to Congress and hammer out a deal where you solve the dreamer problem, but you also fix our broken immigration system, turn it from an illegal to legal system, President Obama used his pen. And he issued all these DACA memorandum, and that was used by the coyotes. Said, America's changed its policy. By the way, the coyotes are these evil human traffickers. And if I have time, I'll talk a little bit more about that, because we don't talk about enough about the depravity of that trade that our laws are allowing to happen. Right. Okay? So anyway, so the coyotes down in Central America, and these are basically, it's so sophisticated, it's almost like a travel agency now. But they're down there saying, America's changing the policy, come across as a family unit, and you'll get a permiso, a piece of slip paper. They called it a permiso. It was called a notice to appear to your court date, which the vast majority, or a large chunk, do not ever show up. Okay? So that sparked it. I put this chart, I've been developing this chart for the last 4 or 5 years in my committee. Democrats hate it when I put this thing up because they're, DACA didn't cause this. Yes, it did. Absolutely. That was the catalyst so it really took off until, if you take a look at 2014 there, 137,000 combination children and family units came to this country, and President Obama declared that correctly a humanitarian crisis. A quick little side, I led a delegation. I became chairman of the committee in 2015. We immediately went down to the border at McAllen, one of the main flows, one of the main areas of crossing. And the CBP, through just willpower, skirting every regulation that was going to prevent them from actually dealing with this in a humanitarian way, set up the center, set up chain link fences so you could keep children, vulnerable children, away from potentially dangerous adults, And we went down there, bipartisan basis. We were singing CBP's praises for what they had done, how they were trying to deal with this humanitarian crisis. The same center is still today. It's improved. We've actually improved our techniques, but that's the exact same center now the Democrats call keeping these kids in cages. Okay? I mean, it's just one of the little hypocrisies of the left. Anyway, so Obama realized that was a real problem. So what he started doing? He started detaining families with their children. A consequence, they would adjudicate their claim and they would return them. They didn't return many, but just the detention. Just the fact that we weren't just giving them a straight pass into our country worked. It went from 137,000 to 80,000 people the next year. Of course, outside groups didn't like that, so they took the Obama administration to court. And they sued them, saying you can't detain children under the Flores settlement, which applied to it was a case back in 1985. I can't remember her first name, but somebody with the last name of Flores, and she's an unaccompanied child. And it set the standards and took really years for that lawsuit to end up in an agreement applying to unaccompanied children. Well, somebody sued the Obama administration, and that reinterpretation of the Flores settlement agreement said, oh no, it applies also to accompanied children. So the Obama administration had two choices. They could either just detain the children, detain the adult that was breaking the law, coming to this country illegally, and let the child go, or keep the families together and let them all go. That began catch and release. The Obama administration, hard to blame them, because we saw the family separation policy was just not politically sustainable, wasn't all that smart. So they started catch and release. Well, when you start catch and release, what does that do? It's a huge incentive that's going to be exploited. Now, it took a number of years. The next year we went up to 137,000, then 117,000, 181,000 in fiscal year 2018. And of course, last year was the explosion. And it peaked in May, where we had 4,651 people per day. 4,651. That's a large caravan every day. Now that's all inclusive, but the big chunk was really families, unaccompanied children, came to this country illegally exploiting our laws. Now, through sheer tenacity, no help of Congress passing a law, no help in the courts, where these activist judges keep overturning President Trump's executive actions, but through sheer tenacity and willpower, we have enacted some policies like return to Mexico and bludgeoning, let's face it, certainly negotiating hard with Mexico to increase the number of people they're turning their attention to, okay? Trying to secure their border with Guatemala. We brought that down to around 1,400 per day over the last month, 1,400 per day. Now, Secretary Jay Johnson a few months ago, and I appreciate his honesty, he was on Morning Joe, and he said he would come to the office. This during the Obama administration, he said if the number of people that came to this country or the apprehensions were 1,000 a day, I knew that I was going to have a really bad day. We're still at 1,400. And again, there's still no help on the way from Congress. Let me go to our next. So in the end, what I started doing is I started estimating for my colleagues. Kept publishing this chart. Because we were pushing this chart, I actually put this on one of my cups, and I gave that cup out in the subway because I was giving these charts to reporters, and they were not reporting on it, so I finally gave them a cup with this chart on it. Couldn't throw it away. Gave one to a guy from CNN, Manu Raju, and said, give this also Dan a bash, But anyway, it didn't take too long after I was doing this where you didn't see Democrats saying this is a manufactured crisis. Nobody could deny this. But I was estimated back in May that could have been 800,000. In the end, it was over 600,000 children, but primarily family units coming to this country illegally. Now, in this week's hearing, what we heard from Ken Cuccinelli is that last year, same year, they had 105,000 referrals based on credible fear to USCIS. Now, what's significant about that is 608,000 people came in. They were just let in. It was complete. They didn't even have to claim credible fear. More than 500,000 people just. That's why I kept calling CBP, no fault of their own, became a mere speed bump on this path. So let me just polish this off because I'm then getting the hook here. A lot of people, on the left say, well, it's because it's a war zone down there. Well, here's the truth. You can see murder rates have actually returned to their 2008 levels. There are, and I don't have the stats right here, there are cities in America that have far higher murder rates per 100,000 than the countries in Central America in total. So we've got far more dangerous places in America than Central America in total. And the last thing I want to point out here is, and this kind of speaks to, how do we deal with the dreamers? I want to fix the problem, but I am going to insist if we fix the problem of the dreamers, that is our opportunity to fix this problem. And what this has done, I've used this in hearings repeatedly, this lays out all the laws, the years the laws were passed, 86, 90, 96, all the way through, and then it puts an estimate of how many people are in this country illegally. You notice something here? Yeah. It never goes down. So Congress, and this is what drives me nuts as a private sector guy, Congress is great at passing a law with a great title. I mean, call it, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, okay? Does nothing in terms of what the name of the bill actually says. It doesn't fix the problem. Often it exacerbates the problem. So what I'm going to do is, Lindsey Graham tried to actually fix the asylum laws, which is the main problem. We've got that very low credible fear standard. Only 20% max actually have a valid asylum claim. Of all these people coming in, they're economic refugees. They got to wait in line. So we need to raise that initial credible fear standard. Lindsey Graham tried to pass that, couldn't. I think with the recent announcement with the Supreme Court, we're probably finding that the dreamer issue is going to land right back in Congress. So what I'm going to do is use my committee. Even though a lot of this law is not my jurisdiction, I can craft a law, come before my committee. We do operate on a pretty nonpartisan, bipartisan basis. We've spent so much time laying out this problem-solving process. I'm going to do everything I can in the intervening months, once we get past impeachment, to actually try and fix this problem, the whole problem. Jared Kushner's got some great ideas. They've got a piece of legislation. We'll pick it up, and maybe once and for all, we can solve the problem of the dreamers while we fix this problem and stop incentivizing people and having our laws be exploited by some of the most evil people on the planet, these human traffickers. And I didn't have time to really get into it, but thank you all. God bless you all.
Hold on, ladies and gentlemen. Since we have the opportunity here, what I'd like to do is ask the senator a question, because we've just seen kind of a historic week with the proceedings that are going on in Washington, D.C. Do you have any comment, or would you comment on that and maybe what you're foreseeing if things happen to come up in the Senate?
Sure. Well, my first comment is very similar to Jim Jordan. By the way, Ambassador Taylor's a really great guy. I like him. But he said, and you're the star witness? I mean, they've got nothing. This is just a continuation, the latest manifestation of the left's hatred for Trump. And I've said this publicly. The day after election began the effort to sabotage this administration. The whole Russian hoax, it was a hoax. It was totally false. It was planted. That's a story that needs to be told. But this is the latest manifestation. I mean, pay attention to tomorrow. I can't remember. I can't tell you exactly what news I will make. But over the next couple of days, you will see news coming out of my committee in terms of our oversight work, as well as, I think, some of the testimony I'll provide for the committee as well. So just stay tuned. God bless you.